I know this is a little late, but I feel like I might explode if I go any longer without discussing this episode. Originally, after watching the Return of Doctor Mysterio on Christmas Day, I had a huge rant and a rave planned for Boxing Day for this channel, but I stopped halfway through recording it for the basic reason that I wasn't certain on my thoughts. In the past, I've changed my mind on quite a few episodes after a little thinking time and a little bit of a rewatch, and it's worked wonders on episodes like Flatline and Under the Lake, which I wasn't too keen on at first. For the sake of getting a well-rounded opinion, I have treated this the same as those episodes. However, to the contrary of this, a ponder and a rewatch has actually made me think even less of this episode in all honesty. So let's get into my review so that I may explain my position, which is surprisingly unpopular, on the Return of Doctor Mysterio. This episode had a strangely structured plot, to say the least. In a way, it felt like there were two separate plots in this episode, the first being the evil alien corporation, and the second being the superhero romance part. My problem with this is that the two plots barely mix with each other. In fact, I believe there's only two scenes in the entire episode where you see the Ghost, who's the superhero, with the members of the corporation, which really makes their stories seem quite fragmented and poorly put together. In a way, it feels like two completely separate stories had their seeds put in the blender, and this was the end result. Furthermore, the corporation plot was really undeveloped. It barely gets any screen time due to the fact that most of the runtime is spent in the flat developing the romance plot. This really hurts the episode, as the alien plot just isn't satisfying at all due to the fact that the plot didn't go anywhere and the plans were only found out in the last 5 minutes via exposition with very little build up, and at the same time breaking the rules of show, don't tell. It just feels like a throwaway, despite the fact I'm sure it could have been interesting had it been properly developed. But what about the romance plot, as that was certainly the centre of attention, hogging up most of the screen time of the episode? Well, actually, it's even worse in my opinion. I don't buy the relationship at all, mainly because the reporter falls in love with the Ghost instantly with absolutely no build-up. The rest of it is just filled with cliches of old superhero films like Superman. But when I say filled, it's more or less just a series of tropes from these kind of films in its entirety. I know the intention of the episode was to pay homage to the superhero films of old, but there's a difference between paying homage and just doing the exact same thing as something else with little creative input from yourself. An example of this would be the rooftop scene where the Ghost and the reporter meet for a date. It's literally the exact same stuff you see in Superman with barely anything changed. So overall, the plot is an absolute mess, with the only redeeming quality for me being that the corporation plot might have been interesting if it was actually developed. Yet again, they seem to be struggling with Capaldi's Doctor despite his great start in Series 8. In this episode, he feels a bit like an old Matt Smith, and that's really not a good thing for me. I want Capaldi's Doctor to be more distinct than the other New Who Doctors, like he was initially, rather than as generic as he felt here. Usually Capaldi's performance is something that shines no matter the quality of the episode, however I felt he was a bit lacking this time. It wasn't awful, but in all honesty I didn't think he was very good in this episode. Maybe this is because he was off for a year and is struggling to get back in the role, which would be pretty understandable considering what they'd done to his character in the script. However, I still thought his performance was pretty poor, and hopefully this will just be a one-off thing and he'll be back to his usual standard by Series 10. Matt Lucas is a very charismatic actor and he puts in a good performance. However, the character of Nardole, well, there isn't really a character there. He doesn't display much personality. The only thing I could say about him is that he's quirky. But that's not a whole personality, that's a trait, and you need a lot of traits to build up a well-rounded character, which Nardole certainly isn't. It doesn't help that he has barely anything to do here. He felt a bit superimposed on the episode, which wouldn't surprise me if this was being written after it was confirmed Matt Lucas was coming back. On top of this, we still barely know anything about Nardole, so it's difficult to understand him as a character, what he's like, and why. Again, hopefully this is something they'll improve for Series 10. As for the Ghost and the reporter, they're pretty forgettable, which isn't surprising really, as they're just cliches from other films with very little depth of character. Moffat does have this very strange obsession with nannies here, which did confuse me. A nanny is a noble enough profession, but it's not anything amazing, yet he tries to make this be one of the defining traits of Grant the superhero's character. And I didn't really understand it, and I don't think it works, nor does it have any bearing on Grant's personality, so I'm just confused as to why it's there. It doesn't really help that both the actors aren't very good in this episode. They're both fairly uncharismatic, and Justin Chatwin really doesn't bring the gravitas required for a superhero character, and his voice when he's the ghost does sound a bit silly. Surprisingly, the acting in this episode has been of low quality, which is odd for New Who, which usually manages to do this quite well consistently. All in all, the supporting characters are either just cliches or don't really get enough screen time to be even worth mentioning. Ed Bagler-Zett is back at the helm of director here, and I can't say he's one that I'm a great fan of. The direction isn't terrible, but there's certainly some things to be desired. It's difficult to really explain, but there's just a few moments I feel he stumbles in his direction. One example would be when the ghost is on screen. There's no effort made with the camera work to make him look like an intimidating figure, and this particularly could have went a long way to make this episode stand out a bit more in terms of direction. All in all, the supporting characters are either just cliches or don't really get enough screen time to be even worth mentioning. Plus, we get more of Murray Gold's really annoying silly music, which drives me up the wall. I'm thankful he's using it a lot less in the Moffat era than he did in Series 4 for instance, but it really pissed me off that it was here nonetheless. However, I will give Murray Gold some credit. Recently, and including this episode, he's been infrequently using a bit of synth, and it really stands out amongst the rest of his work, which sounds a bit samey. The more I think about it, the more I really don't like this episode. Fair enough if you did, but I personally despised it for all the reasons I just listed. Another very poor script from Stephen Moffat. Let's hope he can prove in Series 10 that Heaven Sent was not just a fluke. I'm glad they tried something different this year, but I don't think this was the right idea for Doctor Who. How long will it take for the BBC to realise you don't need a stupid gimmick at Christmas to get people watching? Look at what Big Finish have done with their Doctor Who Christmas specials, such as The Chimes of Midnight or The One Doctor. They prove that people can love the Christmas specials just as great stories on their own 2 feet, and stupid gimmicks aren't needed. It's another really poor show for Doctor Who at Christmas, but at this point, I can't say I'm surprised at all. But it did shock me how low the quality of this one was, even compared to its brethren. I'm serious when I say that this is on the Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe level of bad. I give The Return of Doctor Mysterio a 1 out of 10. I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I understand if you didn't agree with my opinion. This is quite an unpopular one, but I don't care. I wanted to put mine out there, and if you disagree, put your opinion in the comments. I want to know why people like this, because I really could not find the same enjoyment that others could. So that's it for now, and I'll see you back next time in another video.